Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and with me, I've got Mac.
Was good? Fuck you.
Welcome, Mac. Gio, unfortunately, won't be able to join us today, but don't worry, guys. We'll be previewing all of the Match Day 3 games coming up in the Premier League. Before we get into it, don't forget to follow us on our social medias, both on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is at @houseo_footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, feel free to get in touch with us via email. We love hearing from you guys, and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. But yeah, let's preview some Match Day 3 action, Mac. The one that really sticks out to us is definitely the Newcastle versus Liverpool game. Just going to preface it with what you've had for us here. Liverpool won both games last year, 2-1 at Anfield and then 1-0 at St. James's Park. But I think it's fair to say we think it's going to be it could be a different result this time around, given how both teams sort of started their season and what a lot of people are expecting from these two teams. So give us your rundown on what to watch, what to expect, your initial reactions to this game.
I think these are two teams that thrive in chaos, and it's going to create a very much enthralling, chaotic, mass attacking game potentially, where both these teams don't mind sticking in a challenge. They both are very comfortable in a high press. I really think the game, and we can dive deeper into individual matchups potentially, but the midfield battle is going to be key. I'll be very curious to see if there's any changes to the Liverpool midfield we've seen over the course of the first two match weeks. Of course, with McAllister having his red card kind of rescinded, so he's going to be available for this match. But I think that midfield battle, who's able to kind of stick in more challenges, get their team on the counter, get their team rolling on the front foot, would be better in position. And I think it's not going to be a game where I feel like you're going to have long strings of possession for each team. It's going to be kind of more of a back and forth, chaotic match where in transition, that's where more of the opportunities come from. It's more so it's either a great tackle that's going to create that or more of a mistake from an individual player. So I think this game's fascinating, exciting, and will be a great test to see, because if Newcastle are going to be that team that they were last year and potentially take a step further, this type of matchup sets themselves to be kind of have a statement performance, a statement win potentially coming up for a result against Manchester City that they weren't very pleased with, right? So I think that this is an easy, potentially a way for them to be able to turn that around and get the kind of the blood flowing back into their system of a team that is going to be, hopefully for them, for their sake, a consistent top four threat for this year.
Yeah, definitely top 4 should be their goal. And it, again, new year, new season, new looking team, and I think new expectations for Newcastle. I feel it's fair to say they should be looking very favorably to get a result here. Especially, let's dive into some matchups there. Like you pointed out, it's going to be a chaotic game. A lot of chances on both sides for Newcastle for sure. First game, won at Aston Villa, I believe. Sorry, they were at home to Newcastle. Newcastle was home to Aston Villa, won 5-1, and then went on to go scoreless at City, which it's kind of like, bullfighting, when they are sort of teasing the bulls and then they're giving them a chance to sort of hit someone, but they don't really get the chance to. I think this is the crescendo. It's going to happen at Newcastle against Liverpool with the back line that Liverpool, the questions that Liverpool have definitely at the back. And Anthony Gordon, of course, former Everton player, he'll be looking to hopefully inflict some damage to his former rivals and of course, upcoming rivals for Liverpool. So that's something that I think a lot of us will keep an eye out for. Anything else stand out for you on the Newcastle side, Mac?
I think the analogy used with the Bulls is very fair, because Man City, how they be able to keep possession can make they feel like they're elusive, they're like ethereal, where they can kind of just escape out of that press because they have kind of the right tempo, the right rhythm to be able to get through. Where this Liverpool side, especially in midfield, it's too new. They're not going to have that, so you can feel like there's going to be aching for mistakes there, and that is when that Newcastle, or if it kind of to carry on your analogy, that Bull is going to hammer somebody and knock the crap out of somebody, and it could not really look good. I could definitely see a situation where, let's say maybe a McAllister's out of position, holds on the ball for too long, something like that, of that ilk, and that line potentially as well, where something like that happened and Newcastle could take advantage. But given that tempo, that still leaves considering how high of a team that they want to be able to play, that Newcastle team, that leaves a lot of space in behind for a Liverpool threat that is very, very present, very, very lethal. And it'll be interesting to see which team ends up winning out, considering these types of matchups. As well as Dan Burn is still starting for Newcastle, which for me, again, he's probably one of the more confounding players for me, where I look at him, I watch him play, I'm like, how does he not get roasted up and down by some of these right wingers in the Premier League week in, week out? But he does a very decent job. But against Mo Salah, who arguably is in the top 2 right wingers in the Premier League over the last 5-6 years, probably number 1 with a bullet. So I think that this is a tough matchup for him. And even though he's played well over the course of last year and a bit, this might be too much for him if we look at individual matchups as well coming into this game.
I love how you pointed out because, of course, they did sign Lewis Hall from Chelsea on loan, but I think it's too early for him to start. Much more of an attacking-minded left back or wide back classified as. But of course, Liverpool with Mohamed Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold on the right-hand side, and of course the new addition of Dominic Szoboszlai. He featured a lot on that right-hand side for Liverpool, and getting that balance right for them, especially on that right-hand side to draw defenders in. That at times 3v1 will definitely be a point of focus for Liverpool to attack this Newcastle team. And of course, Gakpo has featured as sort of a 10 for Liverpool in the first 2 games. Will he be given that role again? And in that case, does Klopp have a mind in hopefully dragging back either one of Tonali and or Guimaraes so that they can be dropping? They would have to be forced to drop a little bit deeper to sort of take care of him, while it leaves another sort of 2v2 battle in midfield, which I would still fancy Newcastle like their chances in winning that battle, but it'll be interesting to see what Klopp does. Or does he resort back to more of a traditional, maybe 2 holding midfielders and maybe just, or even 3 just center midfielders to bomb up and down rather than 1 playing higher? Because obviously the things that Liverpool faced, I think, with Chelsea, a new-looking Chelsea, and of course, no disrespect to Bournemouth, a team that Liverpool felt they should be beating, that you could sort of see the thinking from Klopp that, we might shift it a little bit. But wondering if, we talked about it early in the season, will this be sort of the opportunity for Klopp to go back to what has been tried and true for him and has worked for him in previous seasons? Or is he going to sort of stick with this new formation? Of course, Endo coming in, I'm not sure he's going to be ready, especially against such a physical team as Newcastle. So something very interesting to watch there. I guess final predictions for this game. Before you do, though, I just wanted to mention this could be one of those games. My early prediction was there's going to be 3 goals scored after the 90-minute mark. This game, I think, screams for it. I think it's going to be very high scoring, and it's going to be very back and forth. So as a Liverpool fan, I'm kind of scared going into it. But what are your thoughts, Mac?
I definitely agree in terms of a high-scoring affair. This could definitely be. I think that, just like what I mentioned at the beginning, the midfield battle will be very interesting. And as you highlighted Gapco, I don't think Endo would end up starting in this game. I think it's still probably a little bit too early, but I'd be very interested if he were to start. Is there a way that you can shift the player to man-mark Bruno Guimaraes, take him out of the game, because he's very much a straw that stirs the drink of the Newcastle midfield whenever they are in possession. Aside from transitional goals, he's really one that initiates most of the plays out the back, especially if Trippier is not having a good game on that right-hand side. So he, along with Almiron, because he never needs somebody to be able to cut in and be a threat, which creates himself to be more of a threat on that end. So I think if you can do that, that may have been a little bit interesting. Have Endo starting centrally, Szoboszlai a little bit up top, and maybe have McAllister's man mark. Ideally, it's probably not his favorite position because he wants to get on the ball. Defensively, probably not as aware, but it's probably a little bit easier than some roles he's taken these last couple of weeks, is playing really as the 6 in a lot of formations, which is very, very much out of the norm for what we've seen McAllister over the last couple of years with Brighton. So I think that would be interesting if he had a little bit more flexibility. What are some options there? In terms of prediction, I'm going to go because I really feel like the matchup for me, aside from that midfield, which I think Newcastle may edge it, I don't think defensively right now Newcastle are where they were last year. especially in that Mo Salah matchup. I think Dan Burns are going to have tough legs. I think they're going to be able to get in behind very much that Newcastle back line and create some space. As long as they get that first goal, I think the further that Newcastle press up, the more kind of joy Liverpool are going to have. So I'm going to go for a 3-1 Liverpool win here. And then I think, because again, that also goes into my joy that I think if Eddie Howe does not start well for this Newcastle team, especially when the Champions League starts, he could be on the chopping block. So I'm going to go, like I said, with the 3-1 Liverpool win here.
Ooh, vital points for Newcastle to pick up, especially early in the season. But on that, I don't know. I guess because I am a Liverpool fan and I'm quite wary about the challenge up ahead. I feel that Newcastle at home is going to be one of the toughest places to go this season, and I'm not liking the chances for us to get a result there. So I'm actually leaning towards a Newcastle win.
I love it.
Maybe a 2-1, maybe a 3-1, just because the way they balled out against Aston Villa, they had multiple chances. Aston Villa, again, in their game, we touched on it, but their high line, very much Liverpool.
Wait,
that's going to cause a problem.
High line, and that gives Liverpool fans heart attacks? Is that a thing? I was not aware of this. I'm sorry. No?
It's a disclaimer for when you become a fan. It's like it shows up when you play FIFA, and then there's disclaimers about what you're about to enter into. Yeah. It's an agreement, and you have to sign it. And
it's under the terms and conditions. I understand.
Exactly. So, but for sure, a fun watch for I think all fans and especially neutrals who will I think should expect a lot of chances and goals for this game. But let's move on to another game, Mac, that should have I guess a similar style, a lot of chances and hopefully a lot of goals as well. Is Brighton versus West Ham. Of course, Brighton winning both games last year, 2-0 in London and then 3-1 at home. Brighton continuing the way they ended their season last year with 2 wins out of 2. A team that, is still, a lot of EPL teams are getting used to sort of their build-up structure and how they play on the ball. Does West Ham have enough to sort of spoil the 3 out of 3 potentially, or do you think Brighton should be looking at themselves as favorites to win this game? What are your initial thoughts for this game?
To be blunt, I don't think West Ham have a chance in this game. If you were to ask me to very, very quickly, I think Brighton right now are so high flying, scoring. They're such a threat. I think they're one of the scariest teams when you look at offensively, where you really don't. You can kind of pick your poison of who's going to be able to kind of show up for them. You can have Enciso, you can have Ferguson, you can have Atomo. You have so many different threats up top. Where it's kind of like the reverse of Brighton in previous years, where it was just Neil Maupay who's going to miss a sitter every single game. Whereas this team, there seems to be a plethora of options where, hey, we don't know who's going to sting us. We don't know who's going to be able to kind of get that goal. The reason why I think this game is fascinating is because I think West Ham are a much better team than they were even in the middle of summer, even towards the end of last year, where they're kind of having a lot of dead legs, very tired legs going in towards the end of the season, playing on multiple fronts. And now they have kind of a bought-in structure. I think they've like almost tripled down in terms of their style of play. It screams, it screams like a rainy night in Stoke, waiting for a long throw to slip on somebody's, for someone to make a mistake and they just get a sweaty header. And they've signed the players to perfectly implement that, and they're continuing to be linked to players that are perfectly fit to that. So I think I love the split in terms of play styles. I think this is too much a level above for West Ham at the moment to match up to Brighton. But I think if West Ham do come and play decently and don't get absolutely smacked, I think this is a step forward for them, because this Brighton team right now, top of the Premier League. And I think at the end of the weekend, very much would be in the same position. So I think that this team right now is very dangerous, but West Ham can put down a marker. And as long as they don't get absolutely throttled, they can look, hey, we're still looking to make new signings. We still have some of the rice money to be able to spend. We were able to keep Man City's hands off Paquetá. We have now another threat up top to be, and who's going to stay with us. Antonio's got off the kind of got off at the mark with his first goal in the Premier League this season against the win against Chelsea. So I think that they, even though they might lose, they can still get very good momentum out of this game, considering how well Brighton have played to open the season.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people will also be very high on this Brighton team. The way they started, 8 goals in the first 2 games. really, what more can you ask for if you're a Brighton fan and you're sort of used to, like you said, Maupay getting 3 chances, maybe hitting the target on one and then scuffing the other 2 chances. No disrespect to him, but they've definitely come a long way, and it shows. And the style of play, we expect them to dominate a lot more in terms of possession, and even just pressing out of the from the front. I think that will be a big problem for West Ham, who, like you said, not the team that would love to build up from the back. I know that they have some players now that, your Paquetás, of course, your James Ward-Prowse, a little bit better on the ball compared to previous midfielders that they've had, now that Rice is gone. But still, I think it's going to take some time for them to gel. And for sure, if David Moyes wants to go that route, it's definitely going to take them some time to get used to that. But yeah, no, the way that they're sort of approaching games, as long as Antonio is willing to run in behind and cause problems for defenders, they'll always have a chance. But just looking at the matchup, I think it might be too early for West Ham at this point, and Brighton is just a problem that you can't really solve. But funny thing to note from these two teams is they were both, or have both, at one point this summer been linked to one single player, and that's Mohamed Kudus, who I'm very high on. Actually, a reason why I had Brighton as one of my dark horse teams was because at the time of recording for that podcast, he was strongly linked to Brighton, and he's a very, very bright offensive player. Plays kind of as a winger, kind of second forward from what I've seen, and definitely can give you another option going forward in terms of taking a player one-on-one or creating something through just a piece of magic. And I think it's going to be interesting because West Ham is now interested in him. They were also interested in El Naziri, I believe, who is from Sevilla. And then, of course, I'm not sure if you saw the memes, James Ward-Prowse looking for a arrow thread in the box. What other way would David Moyes have gone? Of course, he's going to look for that, but it will be interesting to see if they do add those types of players around this team. It's now confirmed that Maka has left for Atlanta, which, a season in the EPL really didn't cut it. And though he still has a lot of potential, West Ham have decided to move away from that type of player. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Mac. West Ham, they have currently, as of the time of recording, Antonio, who is a Premier League striker, Ings, who is he knows the Premier League well enough, but injury is always a concern. Is West Ham, you think, okay in terms of players going forward, or do you think they should still look to add in that offensive positions, considering, of course, they do have the Europa League this season to fend for?
Absolutely. They need to add. They need to bring in reinforcements, especially up top. Mikel Antonio is on the wrong side of 30. You knew that Scamacca was kind of cooked if Mikel Antonio was coming on an interview saying David Moyes doesn't like Scamacca because he's not his type of striker. So that's not the foundation of a relationship you want with, as a player on the team, as observing his teammates and then coming out on a podcast and saying that. That's immediately red flag. Scamacca, I'm sorry, may as well pack your bags. But the question would be I think more so is, okay, if David Moyes is the long-term manager option, they have to bring in a striker that's going to fit that style of system that he wants to play. If David Moyes, considering his age, I wouldn't be surprised if West Ham ownership are looking at it, okay, he's not going to be around for that much longer, so we have to look at a transitional plan. Do they sign a player like Scamacca that had a lot of potential, a lot of bigger European clubs looking at him to be able to bring in as kind of a back option, Antonio, in the interim? But how can we make sure that player is still garnering enough minutes, enough attention, and is going to enjoy their time here to want to stay for after the Mikel Antonio era and the David Moyes era? So I think that it's a very fine line that they're trying to thread, but they do need to bring in reinforcements because with the competitions they're playing in, Mikel Antonio has had consistent injuries given his age as well. He's a great player, phenomenal player, and exactly knows his role within that system. It will just be, they need a little bit more. And the tough part for them is everyone knows they have the money now. They have the cash available to be able to make a big offer on a bigger striker. So I think that now they're in a position where, okay, now instead of what may have cost them 50, 60, may cost them 70, 80. And that's not a position you want to be in, because I don't think that signing a striker for 20, 30 million pounds is going to be enough to be able to kind of bridge that gap and have a good competition to Antonio up top under a David Moyes management. But Just to swing back to this individual matchup, though, just as well as to be able to give you my final thoughts of how I think it will play out. I do, as I said, I think Brighton will win this game. The reason why I think that they win this game, they have won the first two games 4-1 against Luton Town and Wolves, both who I had predicted to be able to get relegated. So I'm not taking too much there. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar result, a 3-1 result for Brighton here. But I think the key players for them really are the Lewis Dunks and the Adam Webster, is when West Ham do clear that ball long, try to get Antonio in a one-on-one situation, that they win those battles to kind of nip it at the bud before they are able to get in transition and create those opportunities. Can they do a sound enough job on Antonio to recycle possession back into Brighton so they can get back on their front foot? So I think that more so is the area of the pitch I'm looking at on a defensive side for Brighton, to make sure that they can contain the West Ham counterattack and make sure that they're stuck in their half. Because West Ham going in, they know that they're going to get 30-25% possession, but they want to be able to make sure that's all in their half. There is not an exit for this team, and their outlet really has been Antonio, especially in that Chelsea game. So I think that's how I think the game will play out, and I definitely give the edge to Brighton there.
Yeah, of course. No, West Ham have to go back to that Chelsea sort of game plan, because I was watching that Chelsea game and they did really well in possession, controlled a lot of it, but West Ham were just found their spots, found their time, and just were clinical enough to put those chances away. And if Brighton is, again, a running joke with Brighton is they haven't had a prolific striker for a while now. If it doesn't go in for them in the first half and they get sort of frustrated with that, it might be a problem with them overthinking passes and forcing things, and then West Ham will just have to find their times and pick the moments, get a goal on the counter, and just steal a win. So yeah, for sure, very interesting match to watch as well, and we'll see what happens. So let's take a quick break here, Mac, and then we'll be back just discussing some more transfer talks and our initial reactions to the opening 2 weekend. So stay with us, guys. Welcome back to House of Footy, guys. We are going to continue today's podcast now, discussing some transfer news in around the EPL. Of course, there is roughly a week left in the transfer window, and so of course a lot of teams are gearing up and making their last gasp signings. Man City is of course not familiar to this, but they have made a signing close to the end of the window. Jeremy Doku from Anderlecht for £55.4 million. Has been confirmed, and it's something that I think it's fair to say Man City definitely needed. What are your initial thoughts on this signing by Manchester City?
I think this is a great signing for them, because it was a like-for-like kind of swap for a player of Riyad Mahrez's style. Because if you're taking a look at the profile Jeremy Doku kind of possesses, he's a pacey, fast winger that wants to be able to get down the touchline and beat players one-on-one. He actually completed more dribbles per 90 minutes than any other player in Europe's top 5 leagues since the beginning of last season. So you can see he wants to be able to get on the turn, go out players, try to beat them one-on-one, and then create opportunities either for himself or for his teammates. I think the interesting part, though, is the adaptation to Pep Guardiola football, where you are very sacred about possession. Is that something he's going to kind of get used to, an adjustment where he can't just be free roaming, he can't just kind of willy-nilly go at somebody when it's not kind of his individual role on that team, where they want to be able to keep possession, keep cycling players around, and wait for that kind of prime opportunity strike. So I think it's definitely a step up, maybe even 2 steps up from playing at Anderlecht, a good team and not the greatest of league, to going to arguably the best team in Europe and coming in as a kind of a key rotational player. I think, though, interestingly enough, this does settle a position dispute right now for Phil Foden, where as Kevin De Bruyne is out, you can feel Phil Foden is going to be playing essentially as much as possible. And this does free up Doku to come out and play on that right wing side, or Bernardo Silva to be able to play there. So you do get more flexibility in rotation for out there, where you don't have to put Phil Foden, I argue, out of position. So I think that's a positive side that I've looked at. And I think Doku has the potential to be a really good player. It's just that, again, those adjustments under Guardiola's system and try to fit in with the rest of the team, I think will take time. But I think the potential is there. There is something to mold from this type of player for sure.
Great shout. It's going to take some time for him to adapt for sure. 21 years old, coming into the EPL. Big signing and a player with a lot of potential. But of course, we'll see what happens with Pep. But one of the things that I'm actually hoping doesn't happen as much, and you could look at it from a Liverpool sort of bias here. And of course, there's news that of course Pep won't be partaking in the games for Man City with having undergone emergency surgery. I hope he doesn't get overtrained, and what I mean by that is I mentioned it earlier in the season. City don't look like they have a raw winger that's just going to be pace, beating his player one on one, and then crossing it down the byline. Just raw pace and a way for an outlet. Of course, they do have Erling Haaland, who is one of the best outlets to have in the world of football. But of course, on the wing, to create something out of nothing, you definitely need one of those players. And one of the criticisms that you could have against Pep is he likes to mold his players to what he wants them to do on the pitch, essentially controlling their every move. But in a player like Jeremy Doku and a player the likes of Riyad Mahrez, before he joined City, I would say that their best point is just creativity and raw ability on being able to create something. And so maybe this is sort of what they need. A lot of what they've done so far, from what I'm noticing, is getting chances from Ederson kicking it long to one of those outlets, not necessarily building it through the back if it's not there, and forcing the teams to sort of, if they decide to go 1v1 when you're trying to mark out of possession, you're going to be left with dealing with Haaland, and if at times you're going to have to double him, then someone's going to be open. So that'll be interesting to see how sort of Pep uses him in that situation. And of course, always have that threat in behind to have a player like him if you need something in a game where you might not be winning. So it will be interesting to see how he does as well, and definitely keep an eye on that. Another player you've sort of mentioned here is Matheus Nunes from Wolves. It looks like they've submitted a bid, Mac. What's going on with that? Could you fill us in?
So they've submitted a bid for 42.72 million pounds. It's still being looked at by Wolves as of right now, time of recording. But supposedly, as Fabrizio, my guy, says, is that already terms have been agreed to with Manchester City. So it's really, the ball's in Wolves' court right now. Arguably, this is their best player. Probably, I would argue, one of the few only good players. And it'll be interesting the type of transition. If he were to leave, how they would fill that gap. So I think that's fair value in the market, but he might be more valuable to Wolves than the transfer fee they're receiving as of right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if this is rejected. But the key part of looking at Matheus Nunes is the type of role he fills on the pitch is kind of a number 10. I think that if he's under Pep Guardiola's system, he's looking up to be a type of midfielder alongside of Rodri, alongside of Bernardo Silva, where it's not necessarily he's the deep line playmaker. He's more going to be that shuttler. He's going to be that similar, if you look at the Arsenal or for Arsenal last year, that Xhaka role where he's jumping up into midfield and being one of the 5 members in terms of front 5. That's more, I feel like, his evolution under a Pep Guardiola system would be. The interesting part there is that under this Wolf system, he's very much been a transitional player where he's not been, I would argue, great in possession, kind of in that final pass, but he's been more good at taking players on and kind of using a burst of pace to be able to get by players. In that midfield position, under a Pep Guardiola system, I don't think that's a natural fit. So I think this, if they were to sign him, this is a project. This isn't for this year. This is for 2 or 3 years down the road. But it's an interesting shout that, hey, they want to be able to get more reinforcements there, especially because they are going to be in a transitional period going forward. Because I think we would all argue over the last 5 or 6 years, Kevin De Bruyne has been probably the best midfielder in the Premier League and is in the conversation as one of the best Premier League midfielders of all time. But a big long-term injury like this, wrong side of 30 again. I know I have to stop saying that because now I'm 30. I feel a little bit weird about saying the wrong side of 30 because a couple more months I'll be there, but he's on the wrong side of 30. So it's not something where I would anticipate Kevin De Bruyne being at this level for the next 5-6 years. You need to find an heir apparent. You need to find a replacement, and you can't just look at internal growth. So picking up a young player like this, potentially, if it does cross the finish line, or if it doesn't, taking a player of this similar type of profile and kind of molding them into kind of a 10, but still a work rate, high level of enough midfielder to do a little bit more. I think that this is a good shout, and potentially, like I said, if it does cross the finish line, a good signing for the citizens.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that and the comparisons that you brought up, and it makes sense if, of course, City are looking to reinforce the midfield. De Bruyne obviously being out. Foden had in that last game against Newcastle looked really, really good, but long-term wise, I don't think they look at him to be necessarily the Kevin De Bruyne replacement. So, of course, they're going to need to think about ways to sort of show up that midfield for a long season and a lot of games to play, a lot of competitions that they're going to be in. The question is, have they left their business too late? I feel like, unfortunately, with the circumstances, it does feel like it. I'm going to have to give them a little bit of criticism here. You have a player in your team that you signed for 50 million a couple seasons ago, Calvin Phillips. He hasn't really featured. There's talks about him potentially even going out on loan. Not the greatest return for your money there. And so, yeah, it looks like they are now sort of trying to plug holes and trying to ride out the season with what they have. Just quickly before we wrap up the Man City talk, Mac, what are your thoughts on sort of their business, and is this enough for them to sort of still have a successful season? What are your overall thoughts on that?
I think the Doku signing is a great first step and it needs to be done, but they definitely do need a little bit more. I think defensively, weirdly enough, they're very deep in that position. They have so many center backs. They're continuing to play with wide back. I understand that's the game plan, but it's just very nice to see and very funny to say. Because again, Akanji and Ake are center halves for most teams week in, week out in the Premier League, and most of the time for Man City, they're going to be playing in a full back position. So I think that they're sound enough defensively. I think again they need to be able to bring in a little bit more in their midfield. I still think that Kovacic for in the midfield position and shipping out Gundogan wasn't enough, especially with Calvin Phillips seeing as much pitch time as you and I. I don't think that's a great signing there. And it doesn't seem like he can be a player that plays alongside Rodri. So I think those are the areas of concern. So I think if you were to bring in at least one, ideally two more players in that midfield position, I think is what's necessary. If they don't bring in someone else in midfield, that's why I think that they could definitely take a step back this year. It may allow opportunities for players like Julian Alvarez and Phil Foden to kind of show out. But I think the drop-off in rotational quality is too great. They need a little bit more reinforcements there. So I think if they put their business too late, Doku's a great first step, but they're now in the position where they're scrambling, and they might have to overpay for somebody, or they might be in a position where they haven't done enough homework on the player that they're signing given the timeline. So it might not end up working well. So I'm a little bit concerned if I'm a City fan that, like I said, in terms of the timeline, but there's still a chance. There's still a chance for them, of course.
Yeah, and of course we wish Pepe speedy recovery. You know, maybe this is what's been hurting his back. You know, the contemplation of what's going to happen, but maybe this is the Pep evolution. You know how he on that Barca team he wanted to get all the midfielders, and if he could field as many midfielders as possible, that was the game plan. Maybe now he's doing that with center backs. He's gonna field as many center backs as possible, and if I have them all, you can't field any, and we're gonna beat you by having the better striker. So maybe that's his game plan. Who knows? But let's move on to some more transfer discussion. This player in question now, of course, Safyan Amrabat. Heavy links with him to Man U, but of course nothing really solidified till time of recording. Still a Fiorentina player, though he has been missing from the squad in action from this week. So there's talks about him potentially going to Man U, of course, still. But you know, there's links as well to my team, Liverpool, which desperately still needs more reinforcements at center defensive mid. So Mac, I guess let me hear your take. Maybe you take a Man U perspective from this saga. What do you think about Amrabat and where he could potentially land?
I think either place that he would land, both teams desperately need him. I would very much want kind of like a decision moment where Amrabat's have to sit down, have a bunch of children around him, and then he'd be like, "I'm taking my talents to Anfield." No, I was just kidding. But like something like that, I think he'd really enjoy because both teams are lusting and thirsting after him. Very similar to kind of the Cavaliers, Miami Heat, and the New York Knicks back in the day for LeBron James. So I get it's the thirst levels are very, very high from those teams for this player. It makes sense because in terms of Manchester United perspective, because Gio's not here, unfortunately, I have to take that position. I don't want to, but I will. Mason Mount has been ruled out for 6 weeks. So that, again, puts a further desperation in this type of transfer because now that if Mason Mount's out, Eriksen's there, and behind Eriksen, you're in Strugglesville. I think now this makes it even less likely that Scott McTominay is going to be going anywhere. There were links of him going to West Ham to join their over 6 feet platoon that they want to be able to put out across the entire pitch, but that doesn't look to be the case. So if he stays, again, that's not the greatest player. And it's funny enough that as soon as Fred leaves, he ends up scoring, so they probably wish they kept him around too. So it's just beautiful times for Manchester United. But I think the desperation is there, as well as they can now, Amrabat could be in a position where you can ask for more, you can get more. He was out of Fiorentina's recent matchup in the Europa Conference League, wasn't part of the squad, so I don't know if it's just more of a mental thing where he's still thinking about going, but they want to be able to reel him back in and kind of pull in Mbappe, or is he really kind of taking a leave? Is he really about to kind of be exited out? But I think Manchester United are in a position where they need a player of that ilk, that workhorse, that runner, because as we've seen over the last couple of games for Manchester United, their midfield has been out of whack. It's been out of shape. And they're missing legs there defensively. Especially with Casemiro, seems to be, again, it's early, a little bit of a drop off there. So having a little bit of cover that's kind of going to take care of the running for him, I think will be very beneficial. As well as, again, considering the injuries, considering the lack of quality, I would argue, after Mount. I think this is a desperate time for Manchester United, and they do need to be able to pick up somebody. And it seems like the last remaining defensive midfield option that's been linked to these bigger clubs, and Amrabat is the last one available. So I think, if anything, Fiorentina is in a good position where continue to drive that price up.
Yeah, I mean, even Fiorentina, waiting to the last moment, waiting to see what these two teams will offer me for Amrabat. And for himself personally, just turned 27 and should be looking, no disrespect to Fiorentina, but should be looking to make that final move to a team that will feature regularly in your Champions Leagues, your Europa Leagues. And so this move would make sense for him, entering his prime, filling into a position on both teams. You could argue he could walk into the starting lineup, maybe next alongside Casemiro. And of course, long term, I think the plan would be for him to take over that role and make that his in the coming years. But of course, for Liverpool as well, could walk into that team, make that spot his for the coming years, and then see what happens there. So definitely interested to see how that position plays out. Again, both teams could definitely benefit from him, but leaving it so late, like I mentioned to you, quite surprised both teams haven't really pushed on for this signing, and just leaves me a little bit confused because he was heavily linked away from Fiorentina right after the World Cup. Throughout the summer, he's been linked, and so there's some questions about perhaps what's happening with him, what's sort of the hold-up with making that move happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does take place before the window closes, and something to keep an eye out for, because of course both teams, I feel like Man U and Liverpool, are still incomplete and could definitely benefit from having a player of his services to help and smooth things over for the rest of the league, rest of the season. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. But just to round off the podcast, a question that you posted for us here: pick a game that you want to say has the biggest chance for an upset. If I may, I'm going to take it in a different way. And that is, of course, I'm going to choose the Friday matchup, Chelsea versus Luton Town. I think there is a chance for an upset. Chelsea might win this game. And of course, I'm joking. It's, of course, Chelsea should be looking to win this game, but I did want to mention them because, Mac, you weren't here for last podcast. We did cover Chelsea, but just want to hear your thoughts on how you think their performance was against West Ham. They did perform, I think, fairly well, but Enzo Fernandez still hasn't really, I think, from what I saw, he has only one registered Premier League win with Chelsea since signing back in January. Not looking great for a start in terms of results for Chelsea. Pochettino, still adjusting to his new team, but there are now new signings that he can definitely rely on. And if he doesn't get a result here, I fear for those Chelsea fans and for management in that Chelsea team to see what sort of abuse they're going to get. So let me hear your thoughts on Chelsea overall.
Okay, so if I get to talk about Chelsea, thank you for allowing me to do that. Just be able to start off. My favorite stat, I know the stat's not necessarily everything, but my favorite stat that I saw going around is that James Ward-Prowse has more assists at one game playing for West Ham than Enzo Fernandez has in his entire time at Chelsea so far in the Premier League. So that was my favorite stat of the weekend. I absolutely loved it. Great to see Caicedo giving... Sorry, do you know who that assist was for? The Enzo Fernandez assist? Who he assisted in the Premier League? I want to guess somebody that's not at the team anymore. Aubameyang? I just want who's it for?
If I recall correctly, it was Kai Havertz.
Beautiful. So again, it's not looking great. It's not good. Not fun times there for Chelsea. I think that they're missing that cutting edge. They seem to be creating a decent amount of opportunities. That Chelsea team. It's just again the consistent problem of finding a finisher that's not named Lukaku and that does not have the first name Romelu. I can't say it right now. But the point being is that they're looking for other options there, and it seems that whenever things are built to look right, that they've spent enough money to solve their problems, somebody gets hurt, something goes wrong. Mudryk goes in for kind of a shot, but it goes in for a throw-in. If you saw that half volley that came in across one time, it absolutely brought me so much joy seeing him shank that far. But Chelsea definitely looked down, absolutely down bad. But I do have to say, great performance for West Ham in that game, if you're going to ask me to talk about them. If in terms of, I guess, a game I would have to be able to say as an upset, that I think I'm going to channel the spirit of Gio here. I missed the opportunity and I regret it mortifully that Manchester United were in a position last week to lose to Tottenham. And I wasn't there to kind of see Gio's reaction and kind of be there and enjoy it. I watched it. I loved it. Just like the pain and sorrow on his face. But to bring his spirits back up, because no one wants to see a sad Gio other than me, but to bring his spirits back up, I think Tottenham are going to be in a tough position against this Bournemouth team this weekend. The reason being is I do feel like this Tottenham team defensively can get bullied and can get bodied and can be in a difficult position dealing with bigger lads. That Manchester United team, I would argue, not the greatest using their most physicality up top. In the first game, I think it's against Brentford, Tottenham struggled dealing with Brentford's physicality, just their ability to lump the ball into the box and try to create opportunities from there. I think Tottenham could struggle with that, and that'll be a theme of the season, in my opinion, that they still need to bring in reinforcements defensively. And this Bournemouth team has players up top to be able to create those types of opportunities. So I feel like they may struggle against this Bournemouth team, even though they look so convincingly strong in some aspects against arguably a much better Manchester United team. But I just feel like that matchup was much more suited to them, whereas this one's going to be a little bit more difficult. And like I said, I want Gio to smile and have a good weekend, because then he comes to the podcast happy.
Yes, of course. I love that shout, though. We'll definitely see what that Spurs defense is made out of. Of course, Man U weren't able to expose them as much as they wanted, but definitely another test for them, so we'll see what they do. But yeah, this pretty much concludes our podcast for today, guys. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at @house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email as well, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. The next time you hear from us will be Monday when we review match day 3 of the Premier League. On that note, thank you, Mac.
Peace out.
Thank you guys for listening.